Let's start by adding a plane. Keep it the default dimensions of 2 meters and hit Control 3 to add a 3-level subdivision surface modifier. Now, immediately we want to apply that subdivision surface modifier and go into edit mode. Select that center vertex and turn on proportional editing and move that up a bit to make a bit of a mound. You can use your scroll wheel to change the radius of influence, and that probably looks fine. We're not going to spend too much time on that because it's just a base to put our tree on. Back in object mode, let's add another plane. In edit mode on that, we are going to collapse all of this. So hit M for merge and merge at center. Turn off proportional editing, turn on snapping, and make that snap to face. And we'll move that vertex up here. Now it'll just it'll stick to whatever surface we have it on. So let's start making our root system by extruding that vertex and making the shape of some roots around this base. Once we have something that looks like a decent root system, let's start extruding our actual tree trunk. And you can make this really whatever you want the shape to be, a straight tree, a curvy tree. I'm going to make something kind of interesting looking, I guess, and I'll turn off snapping to do this. You'll want to make some of our branches go off the sides a little more. We don't want just a flat tree. And really we can go from here. So we can grab the ends of our branches once we have what we think are the branches we want, turn on proportional editing, and we're going to rotate them. Now the angle you're looking at is going to be the angle they rotate on, so something generally from the top. We want to go back to our proportional editing and turn on connected only. This will, well, it'll influence only things that are connected to your selection. So we can move this over here and not affect the branch below it. Once you've got a shape that you are happy with, it will be time to add some mass to our mesh. So to do that, we're going to add a skin modifier, as the title of the tutorial says. And it leaves you with this kind of blocky looking mess. The way we control the thickness of the solidify modifier is to tab into edit mode, select all vertices, and use Control A to scale it down. Now we can see generally what our mesh is doing. We're going to keep proportional editing on and start getting the vertices at the thickest points of the tree. Now you're going to notice that they disappear if we zoom in, so we can turn on X-ray mode. That's the see-through button here, toggle X-ray, and Control A and bring those up quite a bit. We are going to be adding a subdivision surface modifier to this. So you want to make things a little thicker than what they're actually going to be. Now at this point you might notice some of your bends in your branches are a little jagged or a little abrupt. What you can do is hit Control B for bevel and V for vertex, and you can bevel your vertexes and make these a little more curved. Even when we put our sub D modifier on it, we're gonna be refining a little more. Now, once you think this stage looks alright, we're going to turn off our X-ray view so we can see more clearly what's going on, and add a subdivision surface modifier. And mine is showing two subdivisions in the viewport, and I think that might be a little much for what we're trying to look at right now. I'm going to apply the skin modifier. So apply that so that we can actually modify the underlying mesh. You'll see that there are some places that are still kind of jagged turns. That's not too hard to deal with. We can just move some of the edges around until that looks right. But what we really want to get to are these pinching and weird bubbling and jagged corners all over the mesh. They're going to take a little bit of cleanup, and I will walk you through the first of them. However, I'm going to probably speed up the video to not bore you with just doing that. For the mesh cleanup, you're going to want to turn off proportional editing, turn on snapping, and turn that to vertex, and turn on auto merge. What this will do is any vertices that go on top of each other or share the same space will automatically merge without having to perform another merge function on top of that. Basically, what we're looking to do here is to eliminate interior geometry and get rid of edges that don't seem to have faces attached to them, vertices that are overlapping, anything that's duplicated, and simply make a more simple mesh. And you're basically looking to make a shell of the trunk and any intersecting areas. When you run into areas that look like they really should be shading correctly and it's just not looking correct even though your geometry looks correct, two things to do are select all vertices and merge them all by distance. And that will take any overlapping geometry, or overlapping vertices rather, and merge them where they are into one. Another thing would be select all faces and hit Shift N, and that will recalculate all of your normals so that all your faces are facing in the same direction so that you don't get odd shading artifacts. Another thing I did while going around the tree and looking for things to clean up was to find some of the hard bends and remove some of the surrounding edge rings. That way the subdivision surface modifier can make a more gradual bend around some of these corners. Once you have a decent looking primary tree, trunk, and branches, it's time to add some of the secondary branches. So let's go into a top-down view and move our cursor off to the side somewhere, like there. We're going to use the same exact process we used to make the tree, trunk, and primary branches to make our secondary branches. So let's start the same way we did with the trunk. Shift A, add a plane, tab into edit mode in vertex selection mode, and collapse that to the center. And begin extruding until you have some branches that you like. We're going to make 3 or 4 of them because we don't want the same branch just repeated all over the tree. It will be obvious. Once you have the shapes of the branches that you want, add your skin modifier and your subdivision surface modifier. Great, now we have some branches, and we need to create a particle system on our primary tree and use these as our particles. So the easiest way to do that, since we have more than one type of branch that we're going to be putting on there, we'll create a new collection and call that branches. Once you have a collection called branches, move these to branches. The M key will do that, or you can drag and drop up here. Let's name them so that we don't get confused as to what we're looking at. And name our primary tree. While we're at it, let's name the base as well. Let's hide the branches collection and move our cursor back to the center, just because I like to have it there. Now, In order to prep this for a proper distribution of branches, we're going to need to do some weight painting first. So Control Tab and select Weight Paint. Everything is blue, which is a 0 value. Red is a 1, and colors in between are a grade between the two, sort of like a grayscale. So let's start painting the tips of our branches where we want other branches to grow. Okay, I think that looks pretty good. It's kind of a scary looking tree. But if we Control Tab back into Object Mode, we can come down here to our Vertex tab. It's actually Object Data Properties. But we can see here that a group of vertices was created when we painted. Let's call this Branch Distribution. Once we've named our vertex group, and that's really not a necessary step, we can go to Particle Systems and add one. And we're going to make it a hair particle system, and you'll see all that janky looking stuff. Turn on Advanced. We're going to need that in a moment. But the first thing we need to change is render. We don't want to render our particle system as paths. That is what you use when you want to put hair on a character or a creature or something like that. Choose Collection, and just below that, Instance Collection is going to be Branches. And you'll see we have all kinds of branches all over our tree, and they're a weird scale too. They're not anything near what we created them as. The next thing to do to change this is to go to Vertex Groups, change Density to Branch Distribution, and we need a whole lot fewer branches. So let's change this to something like 30. And under Render, play with the scale, bring it up, and make the scale randomness greater. And now that we have these kind of showing up here, you'll notice these don't blend into the branches very well. We can play with the rotation until they blend a little bit better, but we're going to have leaves on here anyway, so we're not going to see that a whole lot. The phase is what we'll use to get a different rotation on these branches, and we'll turn the randomness of the phase up a little bit so that the branches aren't all facing the same way. And that looks okay. Admittedly, I could have done a better job with creating the branches, and if you're not happy with the ones you've got, you can pause the video now and just go back and make some new branches. It's good practice. You can play with the number of branches as well. This is probably too many. I'll go down to 20 on mine. And let's reveal the branches collection one more time so that we can see our originals. We're going to do something similar to these. We're going to weight paint them and put leaves on them. In order to do weight painting on these, we will need to have geometry to paint on. So let's apply the skin modifier. Control Tab gets you back to weight paint, and paint where you want leaves to show up. For our next step, we're going to go to opengameart.org and save this oakbranch.png. The link for this is in the description. Back in Blender, we're going to position our cursor and hit Shift-A and go to Images, Images as Planes. If you do not see Images as Planes, go to Edit, Preferences, Add-ons, and search for Images as Planes, and check that box, and you'll have the option. Shift-A, Images, Images as Planes, and let's go to where we saved that image, and there it is. You won't see anything. Pressing Z and down, or this button here, will change to Viewport Shading, Material Preview, and you'll be able to see your materials that are on your objects. You'll see that these are just white because they have no material as of yet. But right now, this will be our tiniest branches and leaves that will be spread all over the place. Let's tab into edit mode, hit K for knife, and we want to put some seams down through here so that we have some geometry to manipulate this shape. So let's take some of these and move them in. Once you have something like that, select your edges and move them in some direction. You don't have to have proportional editing on. In fact, that may not be what you want at all. So continue moving this around until it's not flat at all, and you could look at it from different angles and see very different things. And we're going to enable Shade Smooth on this by right-clicking and add a subdivision surface modifier to it, and continue to manipulate things until you have something that's not very flat at all. That's probably good enough. You can play with that till you have something you want. While we are in here, let's take this vertex, hit Shift S for our cursor menu, and place the cursor at selected. And once we're in object mode again, we can say set origin to 3D cursor, and that is a right-click menu. Once you have your leaves in the shape that you want, let's add another collection. Call it leaves. And we'll move the oak branch into leaves. And we'll hide it. Now, over on our branches, we want to add a particle system. This is going to be another hair system. And this is going to be another collection type. And our collection is going to be leaves. As you can see, we have leaves all over the place. And once again, we want to change our density to the group that we painted on there. We don't need anywhere near 1,000 leaves. So let's change that number to something sensible, like 10. You can slide this until you have something that looks right. Under render, we want to change the scale. And we want to change the randomness of the scale all the way up so that we have all different sizes of branches. And turn on advanced so that we have the rotation option. Change phase and random phase until you have something that looks completely random but not stupid. This is looking kind of on the stupid side. Just keep playing with these numbers until you have something that looks pretty good. In a later tutorial, we'll get into geometry nodes, which makes this process a little more predictable, but it is a little more in-depth. So for right now, I'm just going to stick with a particle system for the purposes of this tutorial. On our next branch, we want to add another particle system, but right here, select this drop-down and select particle system 001. That should be the one that we just selected. And you do have to change the density to your painted group. That looks pretty okay. Now you'll notice that all these leaves that we added to our branches are not showing up over here. That is because a particle system on a particle doesn't work. So what we have to do is change the particle system on each of these to an instance, or rather convert it to an instance. So in order to convert our particle system to an instance object, we need to go to our Modifier tab, find particle system here, and say make instance real. And before you select anything else, because you don't want to have to reselect all of these, shift select the branch that is nearest to it, and use Control J to join them as one object. Now your branch kind of disappeared. That is because the material on these objects was applied to the branch as well. So we're going to add another material shortly, but first let's just convert all of these. Now that these have been converted, you can see that they show up on our branches on our tree. However, the branches themselves are invisible because of the material that is on them. So now is a good time to jump into creating our materials. So grab a corner at the bottom, drag it up, or wherever you want to show this, and select Shader Editor. You can see that this is the material that was imported when we imported our plane, or our image as a plane for our branches. And we do need to do a little work to the branches. So we want a roughness map and a normal map. So let's go into Search, Shift A Search, and select Bump. Place that here. Normal to normal. And right now it's not doing anything because nothing's plugged into the height of this bump map or the bump node. So what we're going to do is take color, go to height, and it essentially becomes grayscale information here. And what we can do is turn the strength down quite a bit to say 0.2-ish, somewhere around there. And our roughness is not what we want it to be. So let's take color and plug it into roughness. And at this point, it's good to have the Node Wrangler add-on enabled. So again, you would go to Edit, Preferences, Add-ons, and search for Node Wrangler. Hit the checkbox. What it does is it gives us some shortcut keys that we will use here in a sec. So Shift A, and we're going to add a color ramp. And one of the shortcuts that Node Wrangler gives us is Control-Shift-Click. It isolates this node that we Control-Shift-Clicked on, and we can see what it is doing up here. We may not need to adjust this. The glossiness might be the way we want it. We can bring the glossiest parts down a little bit, not quite as shiny, and make the dullest parts maybe a little more shiny. The whiter it is on the scale, the rougher it is. The darker it is, the glossier it is. We'll really only see this in rendered view, what the actual final result is. Now, we want to take one of these and hit Tab. Select part of the branch. Control L will select everything that's attached to it. And we want to go to our Material tab, hit plus, and with that branch all selected, hit Assign. Now this is assigned a new material slot where we are going to create a new material. In order to get our PBR maps for our bark material, we're going to go to cgbookcase.com and find bark 1. I'm going to put a link to this in the description. You can download a 2K or higher, and we'll go back to Blender and start using it. Back in Blender, we want to add those materials or those texture sets here to make a material. So let's select our principled BSDF and Control-Shift-T will bring up our browser window. Go to the location where you've saved those files, those images, and select all of it and hit Principled Texture Set. And this is another shortcut provided by Node Wrangler. The Control-Shift-T, it just brings all of this in without having to add everything individually. Now, we are not UV unwrapping anything. So what we're going to do is change our mapping method from UV to object. And you'll see a bit of a change, but it's still not what we want. We will need to go to each of these images and change them from flat to box. There we go, and we'll only see a positive difference once we change that on all 4. We can also change the blend amount to 0.1 or 0.2, something like that. And now that's looking better, but not super. What we want to do is go to the trunk of our tree, and we want to add that material here. So in this drop down, pick the one that we just created, which we should also name. We'll call this bark. And you'll see that it's on our tree, and that scale might not be the best. So at this point, let's go to Shade Smooth, and that looks a little better, but we can do a little more with the shape of this by adding another subdivision surface modifier, or just turning up your subdivisions. And that might actually be enough to look good. Now to change the scale of this material, we go to the mapping node right here and change the scale. In order to change all of them at once with one number, I usually add a value node. And just plug that in there. And now they're all at 0, but we can make them repeat more the higher this value is. I'm going to bring that down a little more. That seems okay to me. Now this is not going to follow the shape of the tree since we are just projecting in a box using box projection or object projection. One last aspect of this material that was automatically set up that we won't be using is displacement. We're going to delete that, and actually I just added that by accident. We're going to add a bump node and keep this displacement texture. So let's add a bump in front of the normal map. So that goes normal to normal, and color here is going to go to height. This may be a little extreme. It's not going to look very good, so let's bring that down to something a little better. We want a bumpy trunk, but not too extreme. We don't want it too smooth either. So that looks pretty good to me. Make sure that everything here is set to non-color. You see this color space? Except for the base color. If it's not directly affecting the color of the material, you want it to be non-color. Otherwise, it will not turn out correctly. If you're finding that your branches up here just are not looking great, you want them to be longer and not wider, what we can do is adjust the branches individually as well. But first, let's add our materials to these other branches. So select these, Control Shift or Shift click here, and Control L, and that will bring up our link data menu, and we'll link our materials. Now these will have the other material assigned to it. We just need to assign it to the right region by doing this. There we go. Our tree's looking a little better. However, I think our branches should be larger, but just increasing the scale isn't going to fix that because they're just going to get wider as they get longer. So another way to do this is select the branch. Alt S gives us the ability to scale along normals. Now that our branches are somewhat thinner, we can go back to our particle system on our tree and adjust the scale a little more. And if your distribution of these is not great, you can go back and continue painting on the branches. We can change how many actually show up. Alright, now it's time to light our tree, and the way we're going to do that is by adding an HDRI. To get that HDRI, let's go over to Polyhaven and search for something that will light your scene in a way that makes sense. I found this one called Forest Slope. It's got trees around it. It looks like the tree might be in the forest a bit. So that's the kind of lighting I'd like to put on it. We go to this section up here, select HDR, select your resolution, which 1K would be fine because we only need the lighting information. It's not going to be the background of our scene, and hit download. Back in Blender, on our World tab, change the color to Environment Texture, and hit Open. Let's go to our HDRI folder and look for the HDRI that we just downloaded. Forest Slope is the one I used. And if we go to rendered view right now, so Z and up, you can see that we have this entire environment here. Our leaves seem a bit large, but let's focus on getting this background out of our scene first. So let's go up to our render tab here, and down on film, change this to transparent. And now we have a background that we can use in compositing to put our own background or something in it. Now you may have noticed over the past minute and a half that my screen looks a little different than yours. That is because I actually added a camera. So you can hit Shift A for the add menu and add your camera. 0 on the numpad will put you in camera view, and G double tapping Z will move your camera on its local Z-axis, which is forward and back. Home will zoom to the extents of your camera, and you can use your normal movement keys to position your camera. And that is pretty much it for modeling a semi-realistic tree using the skin modifier in Blender. You may want to delete that base, adjust your lighting, adjust your scale of your leaves and twigs until you have exactly what you're looking for, and then give it a render. Whatever final image you do end up creating, make sure to post that to Instagram and Facebook and tag BlenderForge. And as usual, if you found this video helpful, please like and subscribe and turn on those notifications, and I'll see you in the next video. Until next time, this is Carl with BlenderForge. Happy blending!